Afternoon and welcome everybody to this third workshop organized by the OECD and the UNFCCC PCCB Network on partnerships for capacity and development and climate change. You'll see that our colleague Marie Westhoff has added some elements for the netiquette, the chat netiquette and webinar netiquette. So please do refer to that in the chat. But basically ensure that your camera is off and that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. So do post and use the chat if you'd like to have any questions. If you have any questions, if you'd like to have more clarifications from any of the speakers. And we are going to record this webinar or workshop. It will be posted in the official website of the PCCB network, where you will also find in due time a summary of the discussions. And without further ado, I'm just going to give the floor to Jens Sedemun. I don't think that our colleague from the UNFCCC PCCB network has joined. So I think we'll start that way, but Marie Westhoff is here from the side of the UNFCCC, so can confirm whenever Ms. Marzena Hodor joins. So over to you, Jens, and we'll start this way.
Thank you very much, Juan. And it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for joining us for this workshop. My name is Jens Sedemund, and I lead the work within the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate that's focusing on environment and climate change issues. And I would also first like to thank the PCCB network, as well as the NUP Global Partnership, for working with us to pull together this workshop, which is, I think, the last for this year in a number of series. We've worked over 2022 in building our work on this subject. And today's workshop draws on a particular issue, and that's basically partnership. And we had identified partnerships as a third accelerator on climate-related capacity developments in developing countries. And those partnerships include academia, the private sector, South-South peers. Today, we're looking forward to see some examples of how these partnerships can actually deliver sustainable results and provide a roadmap for future action across regions. And as always, the idea is that they do that so as to accelerate action and ambition. So I think we're already pleased to say that we noted that these workshops provide rich experience and have helped ground our work in real life experience. And they also are very much meant and help to uncover good practice and hopefully bring some inspiration to donors and other stakeholders. Now, our work at the OECD on climate-related capacity development will not end here, even if it's the last workshop in this year. But we are also looking forward to bring to the fore recently launched work on capacity development for climate change, with a specific focus on small island developing states, as well as other issues that we're sort of exploring at this point, and we'll be very pleased to share with you as they go forward. But with that, I don't want to keep you much longer. I would just like to invite all stakeholders interested in the subject to also reach out to us, and my colleague Juan, who you just heard, and who is leading this strand of our work. I would like to invite you not just to this side event, but to our next side event on the 2nd of November at the virtual OECD Pavilion for COP27. And also just be in touch if you have a particular interest in the substantive work per se. And with that, thanks a lot. And I would be happy to hand over, I'm not sure if Marzena is maybe now joined, and otherwise the first panel session. So I was informed that Marzena's joined. So looking forward very much to your introduction. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon. I don't know whether you can see
Apologies,
me.
Marzena, we cannot hear you.
Wow. Well, I have my can you?
Yes, it works. Sorry. Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, super. That's excellent. I seem to have problems with connecting. Well, in that case, good morning and good afternoon to everyone that is joining us today. And my name is Marzena Chodor. I'm a member of the PCCB, and I'm leading a working group 3. And I would like to welcome you to this third and final workshop of the OECD-PCCB Network Series on capacity development for climate action and ambition. It has been the PCCB absolute pleasure working with the OECD this year on delivering this series, as well with all the collaborators of all 3 sessions. Today's session is focused on partnerships for capacity development and climate change, and it is organized by the PCCB network and OECD in collaboration with the NAP Global Network. Before we would go into the depths of this event and our panelists are introduced, I would like quickly to introduce you to the PCCB. The PCCB was established at COP21 in Paris, and it seeks to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developing countries. The mission of the PCCB is to identify capacity gaps and needs and potential solutions, and including enhancing the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate change. To support the PCCB mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB network in 2020. It is a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB network provides a platform to share information on best practices, contributes to the work of PCCB in fulfilling our mandate, and seeks to connect with peers across sectors and regions. At the moment, the network unites 310 collaborators, addressing several areas of capacity building in the context of climate action among the network members. The PCCB regularly mobilizes expertise of the network members through events like these, but also at regional workshops, our side events at the UNFCCC Regional Climate Weeks, as well as during the PCCB hubs, which are organized during the COPs. I hope that you will be able to join our hub this year in Egypt. To learn more about the network or how to become a member and its collaboration possibilities as a member, please follow the link in the chat. I'm excited to witness and contribute to this last part of the ECCP-PCCB Network Workshop Series and looking at ways to engage and enhance partnerships for capacity development in the core of the PCCB Working Group 3's work on awareness raising, communication and stakeholder engagement. Traditionally, international organizations, donors, consultants and NGOs have been the main driver of capacity building efforts. However, supporting capacity development efforts in academia, the private sector, and South-South peer networks, especially through partnerships, shows great potential in contributing to climate-related policies and practices. Enhancing capacity development in these sectors would lead to more low-carbon climate resilience development pathways. Today's session would not just identify capacity bottlenecks, but our panelists will also provide examples of best practices and what has worked, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. For now, I look forward to the next 1.5 hours of this webinar and the inspiration that can be drawn for donor investments to scale up or replicate climate-related capacity development. Once again, on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to thank you for joining, and I would like to thank the OECD and NAP Global Network for collaborating on this event with us. So thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor back to Jens. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marzena, and thank you both to you and to Jens for these very interesting key messages for the beginning of the workshop, and to bring us up to speed as well regarding the network and how to engage there. And I think now we will be able to move on to the next session or the next segment. And I'd like to introduce our colleague Mauricio Luna Rodriguez from the NAP Global Network. Mauricio is a policy advisor on climate change adaptation governance at the Secretariat for the NAP Global Network, which is hosted by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Mauricio will be moderating and taking us through this second segment. So Mauricio, over to you.
Thank you very much, Juan,
Yes.
and I hope you can hear me well. Good morning, everyone in the Americas. Good afternoon, Europe, in Africa, and good evening for colleagues who connect from the Asia Pacific and the Asian continent. Very glad to be here as NAP Global Network. This is a very important work, so happy to contribute, and thank you so much, Ian and Marcina, for those intro words to the workshop. And because the time is short, I would like to move ahead with a few intro remarks to frame the first segment of the panel. The workshop today is going to be divided into two segments. I will give you a few details in the moment, but in the meantime, if colleagues can give me a hand to share a few slides to frame the conversation on this workshop. Maybe in the meantime, I can tell you that the idea is to start with some experiences from the Latin American and Caribbean region, and then we'll move on to a broader data scope, to a more international point of view. So if colleagues can give me a hand so I can share a few slides, that would be greatly appreciated. So that being said, let me see if well, I just move ahead, giving you some inputs. So first, I would like to start with some of the discussion questions that we have for today. Some of the questions that we jointly identified is, what are the main capacity barriers that academia and the private sector of partner countries face today across the global south? That's one of the framing questions. The second one is, how can South-South peer learning support be effective in capacity development across regions and sub-regions? And we'll have some very interesting examples from specific regions and across the regions during this workshop. Also, we would like to explore how can donors work with the academia, the private sector, and networks of peers to support partner countries in their efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And also, we're hoping to identify some positive experiences that exist that donors can use to get some inspiration on how to replicate and even scale up these experiences. So just to frame a little bit of the work that as part of the NAP process of the national adaptation plans, we not only do, but it's also part of what countries have to do, moving on from planning to implementation to monitoring and evaluation. First, I would like to emphasize that capacity building is at the core of climate change action and climate change adaptation, along with other enabling conditions such as financing. We heard about that in a previous workshop of this series. Of course, enhancing the institutions, not only the personal or individual capacities, and sharing information is a key element. And just to give you a fact, when it comes to adaptation, 129 countries across the global south have initiated their process of submitting or preparing an adaptation document. So that's a lot of work ahead of us. And also, I was hoping to I was hoping to share with you some high-level facts that from the NAP Global Network we have identified in the NAP process. For example, here you can see that out of 34 countries that have submitted their NAPs up until June, 97% of them have incorporated capacity building as part of these documents. Also, as part of this high-level analysis that you can find in the NAP Trends database that we will share with all of you in the notes of this event. Capacity building in the NAP process incorporates different actors from government service providers all the way to communities and local actors. And for the purpose of this workshop, I would like to emphasize how they also mentioned researchers and the academic community, as well as the private sector. So the countries have already identified the private sector and the academia as key actors for capacity development in their adaptation processes. And also, just to give you a general idea of how we support advancing national adaptation planning in the Global South, we do that through support at the national level on the national adaptation processes, but also at the core of our support is South-South peer learning and exchange. I will give you a few details about that to frame the conversation. And we also generate knowledge products out of these experiences. And we have a very broad experience supporting different countries across regions. And just to give you a few examples to frame the first and the second part of the panel, from our experience, peer learning has a very important role to play in the national adaptation plan processes in connection to capacity building. By creating spaces to allow policymakers and other practitioners and stakeholders to have an honest, and I would like to emphasize, honest and focused exchanges on what works and what does not work. And here in the picture, you can see an example of one of those workshops in the African continent. The NAP Global Network South-South Learning events have brought over 400 people from more than 50 different countries up until now. Participants have also replicated capacity building events in their home countries. We'll hear from Victor and his experience replicating these sort of events in Peru. And to wrap up some framing inputs, we think that academia plays a very important role in climate action as a whole and in the NAP processes in particular. And they're very important stakeholders of these government-led processes. Also, we think that engaging local, national, and regional academics as experts build the knowledge base and the capacities in these processes. And just to give you a quick example, here you can see on the picture Eswatini's NAP task team, which was called together by the government and an expert for the University of Eswatini. So if you would like to find more information on the work we do here in this presentation, you will have our contact details. Now, moving quickly to our panel discussion. As I mentioned, the first segment will emphasize Latin American and Caribbean perspective. We'll have 2 rounds of questions for each of our 3 experts on the first round. Then we will move to our second segment, which is from those experienced in the Latin American and Caribbean region to the world, to cross-regional and so on. We will follow the same method for that. And towards the end, we will have some closing remarks from colleagues from OECD and UNFCCC. So now, I would like to start with our first panel, and I will introduce our panelists. And I will ask you to please turn the camera on when I introduce you so the participants can see you. And I would like to start with Aida Figari. Aida is coordinator for Let's Slack. And welcome, Aida. Very happy to have you here. If you can please give us a greeting so we can make sure that your mic is working.
Yes. Thank you, Mauricio. I hope my mic is working now.
We can hear you clear and loud. That's excellent.
Thank you.
And also, I would like to introduce Ana Maria Majano. Ana Maria is coordinator for Articulac, which is an initiative that coordinates with the private sector. We'll hear more about that. Welcome, Ana Maria. Thank you very much for being with us. Excellent. And for the first segment, I also would like to introduce Victor Santillán Leiva. He is a specialist in communications for the General Directorate for Climate Change and the Certification of the Ministry of Environment in Peru. Thank you for being with us, Victor. Excellent.
Thanks.
So Because the time is short and we have a lot to cover. We have a lot of experts here. We have 2 segments, and we're very excited to share this across different regions. I would like to start right away with Aida. And Aida, Let's Like has a very long experience in capacity building in the Latin America and Caribbean region with a very broad range of participants. So I would like to ask you first, what were the main challenges developing networks of peers from different governments to help inform climate-related capacity building in the region? But also, how did you involve non-governmental actors such as the private sector and the academia? Over to you, Aida.
Thank you very much, Mauricio, and thank you, PCCB and OECD for organizing this webinar and inviting us to share our experience. I would like to start by giving a general context of Let's Like as a platform to frame the answer to your question, Mauricio. And Let's Like is a Latin America and the Caribbean platform that started 10 years ago as a regional platform for the Global Climate Action Partnership, GCAP, that was formerly known as Let's GP. Maybe some of you know them as Let's GP. Its main aim is to provide a meeting space for collaboration, capacity building through peer learning and exchange, complemented with short technical assistances that complement all the way. And all these targeting to promote the resilient and low emission development of the regions. In terms of participation and of membership, we have more than 2,000 members registered, which I wanted to mention was that these members are distributed relatively equally between representatives from national and subnational governments, academia, experts and consultants, NGOs, and other type of international organizations. And it includes some representatives from private sector. So it's a diverse set of members. So this brings me to the first challenge that I wanted to bring, which is how to engage such a diverse set of stakeholders that need to be involved in the different processes. And from our experience, and the first message that I wanted to leave was that Let's Like works as an open network. No? So whoever is interested in joining can register and can participate in the different spaces we provide, no? Depending on their interest, on what they're working on. So being an open network is the first one. Then there's a second challenge, which I guess it is the same in other regions, is how to promote a regional appropriation and engagement and building trust in which the peer learning and the exchange can happen. And I was thinking about this and I thought, and this was the second message I wanted to leave, is that, which is closely linked to the membership, we have a regional governance. No? Although we are part of a global partnership, the regional platform has its own regional steering committee that has a representation of a diversity of stakeholders that are active and relevant in the climate action in the region. No? And currently it is composed of a combination of members from governments, such as the Climate Change Office in Chile, Argentina, Colombia, cooperation and technical agencies like UNDP and UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, some multilateral financial institutions, AFCAF, IDB, World Bank, and regional organizations like Avina Foundation, Sustentar, or AED, as a private association in Costa Rica. So this steering committee, which is very regional, provides a strategic orientation regarding the planning and execution of the activities we have as a platform, no? And the different lines of work that we prioritize to focus our efforts. And finally, there's a secretariat, which currently is led by Libélula, which is an organization that's based on Peru, but has this regional scope. So there's a very regional representation. And then the third challenge that I wanted to share is how to respond to a quickly evolving context. No? And in these past 10 years, and I guess most of you have seen this happen, there has been an evolution of things. No? So when we just started, we were talking about climate change as a general we were focused on raising awareness, understanding concepts of mitigation, adaptation, the LEDS concepts of low emission development strategies. We were talking about NAMAs. We were focused on building bridges among different stakeholders and trying to engage subnational, sectorial, non-state actors. No? So that was like the beginning. And we saw a big change when the Paris Agreement was signed and the countries needed to move forward with their NDCs. There was an increase in the understanding, and this was reflected on the diversity of stakeholders that were engaged in different processes. No? So the needs and priorities started to move, and we received demands very more focused on preparing projects, on how to do different policy, how to prepare M&E systems. So I think when time goes by, things start to evolve and to focus. No, so the third message I wanted to leave is to follow demand-driven approach, no, and always hear on what is needed. And for that, we have been very careful on having annual spaces for participatory priority settings with the participation of different members from all these different stakeholders. No, initially we did those on our annual workshops, and then lately we have been doing that as part of the sessions of communities of practice. So this approach also to be demand-driven has also led us to evolve the type of activities that we have been providing as a platform, no, to respond to those needs. And for example, at the beginning, we were very focused on organizing very frequent webinars where we showcase and share ongoing experience in the region in very new and pilot and innovative approaches regarding climate change. And then we have been maturing these ideas, and now we have these thematic processes more structured as communities of practice. And Ana Maria is going to share a very specific example of private sector engagement, but we also have communities of practice of bioenergy, M&E of climate policies, electric mobility, sustainable logistics. And these are spaces in which we don't just have government representatives, but also academia. We also have private sector consultants. So it's again, going back to my first idea, is there are open spaces for different stakeholders to engage and share and address common challenges that they pose. No, so just to finish this first intervention, just to stress the importance in order to engage different stakeholders is to provide this space where first-hand sharing and showcasing of regional cases is a two-way winning approach. No, you give visibility to things that are being done by regional stakeholders, validating them, and you respond to a very loud demand of knowing what others are doing. No, so people are always saying, "I will want to know how others are doing these things." So that's the main challenges and messages I wanted to share, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Idea. No doubt there's a lot of experience, a lot to share, and a lot of evolution in the process from the beginning of the network to the context today, the ever-changing context and the ecosystem of different actors supporting these activities. So as you mentioned, now we'll move on to Ana Maria, because Ana Maria coordinates Articulac, which is a specific initiative that engages the private sector. And not only that it partners with an academic institution as well. So within that context, Ana Maria, I would like to ask you, what were the main challenges integrating actors from the private sector in climate-related capacity building, which you lead from Articulac, and what approaches were taken to overcome those challenges? Over to you, Ana Maria.
Thank you, Mauricio. I would like to start thanking the organizers of the workshop for the invitation to share the experience of our community of practice on public-private articulation for climate action in Latin America, known as Articular for short, which is, as you mentioned, itself an example of partnership for capacity building, since it is a joint initiative of the Euroclima Plus program, funded by the European Union through GIZ as one of the implementing agencies of Euroclima Plus, the Let's Lac platform, that my colleague Aida has explained, and the Latin American Center for Competitiveness and Sustainable Development at INCAE Business School, using a methodology developed by Let's Slack and also enhanced through 4 years of work of the community and evolution, like also has been mentioned before. We bring together representatives of public and private organizations to participate in peer-to-peer exchange and capacity building activities in a closed group. And we support our members to apply that knowledge in their own organizations and also develop knowledge products to share our learnings with a wider audience. Currently, we have members representing more than 40 private and public organizations from 13 countries. Among our members, we have, for example, ministries of environment and other national government agencies, 2 subnational governments, and a diversity of private organizations such as industry associations, private organizations promoting corporate sustainability, individual companies, agricultural cooperatives, and others. Regarding your question, I would like to say that for us, it really has not been a difficulty to engage private sector participants because that was taken into account in the design of the community. When we started in 2018, we were focusing our work on promoting the creation or strengthening of spaces and mechanisms for systematic participation of the private sector in climate policy making. And then we asked the Euroclima Plus government focal points to propose teams of 3 representatives from each country that were made up of public and private representatives. So we started the community of practice with 10 teams that included all of them private participants. Starting in 2020, we are focusing our work on the alignment of private sector climate action with national climate goals and strategies. In that year, we did an open call to public and private organizations of Euroclima Plus countries and received more than 50 applications. Actually, we received more applications from private actors and NGOs than from government institutions, which of course is logical since there are more actors and more diverse in the private sector. We selected those candidates that met selection criteria. And one of the criteria was that they were already involved in climate action. So we are a group of practitioners actually that develop, as I will explain later, peer-to-peer exchange and capacity building activities. I think that one of our main challenges actually has been to make clear the focus of our work. We are not a private sector only community of practice, and we are not trying to duplicate the work that many of our members and other organizations are doing promoting climate action. But we aim to enhance this action through peer-to-peer exchange and a greater alignment and articulation of public and private strategies, which we consider key to making their efforts more effective. We know that there are already many climate initiatives in the private sector promoted by company associations, international cooperation, but they are not always known by the governments or aligned with national goals. I'm almost finishing this first intervention, but I would like to mention that this is very important. In 2020, GIZ commissioned a mapping of initiatives promoting climate action in Latin America. AED, the organization that did the mapping, found 63 initiatives by 33 organizations in 15 Latin American countries and found that only 49% of them included some kind of policy dialogue. This is the reason why we work with government and private actors so that public policies and goals can incorporate the private sector perspective from the earliest stages of design and discussion, and that the action and investments of companies are more effective, both in contributing to the implementation of national policy goals and to their own business goals. So I look forward to the second round to share more more learnings from the work that we have been doing for the past 4 years in this community of practice.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. This is a very interesting perspective because not only you found it easy to attract representatives from the private sector, given that the whole setup of this group was to integrate private sector and public sector participants, but also different actors from the private sector were actually very eager to take part in climate action and were already taking action in their own like business models. So we'll come back to you with the second round of questions, but now we would like to move to Victor, because Peru has been leading very interesting processes of public participation and peer learning within the country. So I would like to ask you, Victor, from your experience participating in peer learning through the NAP Global Network, both in particular in St. Lucia, in the Caribbean, and Fiji in the Pacific, with adaptation specialists. Can you tell us a little bit more about this South-to-South collaboration?
Of course, and thank you, Mauricio. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, OECD, PCCB Network, UNFCCC, and NAP Global Network for this kind invitation. Also, I want to greet this distinguished panel with a very good application of the gender approach, certainly, and those who, from their homes and organizations around the world, are joining us. Please receive kind regards from Peru, from the Ministry of Environment and its authorities, Minister Wilber Rosas, Deputy Minister Yamina Silva. I'm going to answer the question in 3 steps: the challenge, the opportunity, and the commitment. So, in first place, the world is acknowledging the severity of climate change that threatens to stunt our civilization and our development. We need to turn this realization into concrete action to combat climate change. Delaying climate action is simply not an option today, but how long have we known this? As Mauricio says, I am a communicator and I have been working about climate change for just over 8 years to be able now to tell you with honesty and with experience that we have forgotten the main element for this process: strategic communication, the one capable of revolutionizing the way we spread and call for a renewed sense of urgency and ambition. That is a challenge, the critical factor, in my opinion. Now, in second place, I have been lucky to be one of the lucky ones between 2017 and 2019 to be part of the NAP Global Network per Change, the opportunity to seek input from adaptation planners and managers in developing countries around the world, and receive offer experience and expertise to others who are addressing similar issues in the NAP development process, with the overall objective of promoting opportunities for dialogue in order to drive action. In a very short, simple, and friendly way, I want to summarize this experience. The meeting in St. Lucia in 2017, it was not only a moment to share our Peruvian campaign, "Do you have a minute? Let's talk about climate change," which we try to generate a close and friendly dialogue to taking the topic through everyday actions of life to promote knowledge and connection. This meeting was also the opportunity to discover similarities with a country far away from Peru, but so close in needs and challenge for adaptation especially. I still remember the training and how in practice knowledge was transformed into a music to raise people awareness. 1.5 to stay alive was the song, which they used in St. Lucia to demonstrate the urgency, but in an entertaining and proactive way. The target topic forums in Fiji in 2018 brought together representatives from developing countries and development cooperation agencies in order to facilitate learning and exchange on specific technical topics, more than workshops. TTF contributes to building a community of peers who can support each other through ongoing learning and exchange on specific technical topics related to the NAP process. Fiji TTF allowed me to discover the idea of the first Peruvian National Climate Communication Workshops, which I will talk about in the second question. The TTF in Zanzibar in 2019 connect me with other participants interested in learning and exchanging about similar topics, as for example, specialists and coordinations from Colombia. We keep until now the dialogue and exchange of proposal with them. In this way, we go beyond the workshop through networking and build a permanent space of dialogue and partnership. Thus, finally, I think peer learning spaces represent for me and for this South-South cooperation a sure way to consolidate the commitment, because it's not just about spaces of 1, 2, or some days. It's more about that. It's about the impact that this exchange generates and how we make it sustainable over the time. We are very happy to have been part of these events. We have generated products inspired by them, and now, more than ever, I think they are the wake-up call that everyone needs. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, Victor, because it's very interesting to hear the perspective from one of the target groups of these different capacity development activities. And it's clear that we have a lot to share. Unfortunately, the time is short, so we're running out of it quickly. I will ask the panelists for the second round to be brief in your points, please, so we can also be fair with the second segment of the panel. But going back to you, Aida, very briefly, in your experience, how can donors better support work with academia, the private sector, and peer networks to enhance the capacity of countries in their efforts fighting climate change? What would be your wishing list?
Thank you, Mauricio. I want to make a short reply so I can leave time for the others. But although this might seem like repetitive and something that we are always listening, no? The first thing I want to mention was that we need a lot of collaboration, and by collaboration, I just wanted to spotlight on the principle of operation that we have in the Slack, which is to avoid duplications and to try to find synergies always, no? With ongoing initiatives, with projects, with organizations. So us as a platform, we have always tried to remain neutral and instead facilitate meetings and collaboration spaces and opportunities, which I think is always well received from both sides. No? On one side, agencies or projects that are invited to participate, finding the opportunities to interact and exchange and find further opportunities for collaboration in these spaces, but also from practitioners as the final recipients of the services, that instead of getting multiple invitations to similar activities from different organizations, they find a common space to optimize efforts. No? And I wanted to use an example of a joint effort that we did in 2020. We were in the middle of the pandemic, and we made a joint regional event, which was a collective effort between the SLAC, Euroclima Plus, UNDP, IDB, ECLAC, ADINA, Sustentar. So there were a lot of us. And working together, we were able to make this regional event in which we were able to address 3 different topics. So we did long-term strategies, NDC ambitions, and sectorial action on transport. During a time span of 3 months, we were able to do 30 different sessions and convene more than 5,000 participants. No, and I think it was, instead of having 5 different events, we just have one very focused on each one was organizing and focusing on that topics on which they were stronger. No, and this that's just an example, no? But communities of practice and series of webinars were always doing this in a collaboration way. So the first one is avoid duplication and find synergies with things that are already going on. The second one, which always is always very obvious, and I think it's the main discussion we're having today, is to go beyond the usual suspects. No, the climate agenda is always led and targeted to environmental entities, and they're usually the main point of entry for the cooperation and donors. But there's an increasing demand, especially after the NDC processes, and from sectorial entities, from subnational governments and subnational organizations, from civil society, from private sector, from academia, not only for capacity building needs, which is also what we are discussing, but all the way to access, for example, to financing opportunities. No? So there's a need to articulate this whole ecosystem, as you already mentioned, Mauricio. And again, and as it was mentioned in the beginning, is how to move forward from the talking to the action. No? And we recognize right now there's a big demand on project preparation and strengthening the access to finance opportunities, no? And closing this gap between the ideas and the funds. I think it's a very critical situation now. So we also have an experience. We piloted a regional accelerator on agriculture, climate, and energy. It was focused on bioenergy projects that we identified through the bioenergy community of practice. And 5 of them were selected, and they were supported to strengthen the theory of change, business model propositions, financial issues. And they came from Colombia, Guatemala, and Honduras. But I specifically wanted to mention that case because the beneficiaries that were part of these projects, they came from one of them was from a university, some of them were from private sector entities. So there is actually a demand in that. And just closing and linking both ideas, I think it's very important to capitalize on what has already been done and has been successful. No? Look for sharing on successful experiences through communities of practice, existing networks, promote the adoption and scaling up of actions that have already worked, no? And strengthening knowledge management and communication efforts. And I think what Victor already mentioned on these communication efforts of how to prioritize the language you use and how to use common terminology that is understood by different stakeholders. I think it's very important. So I'm gonna leave it there, Mauricio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aida. You make very good points. Maybe I just briefly would like to emphasize synergies, diversifying the stakeholders that you bring to the table. And of course, we're moving from planning to implementation. And now the challenges in this ever changing context are different. And now I would like to go back to Ana Maria. And Ana Maria, from the Articulac experience, what are the lessons learned engaging specifically with the private sector in climate-related capacity building?
Sorry, Mauricio, thank you very much. To give context to my answer, I would like to point out that we at Articulac and also Let's Lac don't consider ourselves trainers, but actually facilitators of learning process among peers, where we consider each participant is an expert in some aspect and has knowledge and experience to share with the community. And also that everyone that participates has something to learn from the others. In that sense, we are learning from each other and learning together, and we define the topics for our discussions in consultations with all the members. So a demand-driven community is also very important. And one of the main lessons from our work is what Aida was saying, that there is a lot to be learned in climate, in private climate action from what is already going on in the region. And we have learned a lot from our own members, and we feature their experiences in our online and in-person activities. Of course, the challenge is going from isolated successful cases to extended common practices. And we have to go beyond the almost 100 people we have in the community of practice. And then what we have learned is the importance of systematizing the knowledge that we generate, the experiences that we learn from. And that's why we develop knowledge products such as guides, policy briefs, 2-pagers, short knowledge products to share their experience with other decision makers, and also to help our members that knowledge to their own networks. You can find, and I put in the chat the address of our webpage, because all of those materials are publicly available. Another lesson is that there is no one private sector, but a diversity of private actors that have different roles, different capacities, and also different needs. And another thing that we have learned is that to strengthen public-private articulation, you need not only to build capacities in the private sector, but also in the government and even in the technical organizations that support governments in policy making. They need capacities, for example, to understand better what is the decision-making process in the private companies, methodologies for effective private sector engagement, and even language. And by language, I mean not only that we are used to a jargon of climate terms and acronyms, and we assume that people understand them, but also talking about cost, risks, business opportunities, and other concepts that are part of the business language. And in that, in this area, the community of practice has been a great opportunity for our private sector organizations to enhance their knowledge of the climate negotiation process, climate policies, goals, tools, etc., but also for our government members to better understand the private sector perspectives and needs in terms of policy signals, information, and even financing. One last point that I want to make when I mention financing is that one of the things that have been very clear from our discussions is that governments and even international organizations usually see the private sector as a source of financing for climate action. But as I said, there are different types of course, private sector organization. And what we hear from our private members is that they need financing to make those investments that we need to transform development. And they need to know also about climate finance, you know, where are the sources, what are the innovative mechanisms. So just that as a message for the organizations that work in that area. And just to finish, I would like to say that one of our premises is not to duplicate efforts, and that we collaborate with other initiatives within Euroclima Plus and Let's LAC, international organizations and local partners. So I hope that the participation in this workshop will open opportunities for us to collaborate with other partners, so that you know, we will be very happy to respond to questions and follow up on contacts after this event. I'm leaving in the chat the webpage and email addresses for those who are interested in further communication. And thank you very much for including us in this panel.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. You make very important points. I would like to just mention a few, how you see yourself the space as a space where you bring experts with different expertise to exchange ideas. And I think that's a very powerful message. The demand-driven that was already mentioned by Aida as well. And the last point, how the private sector is very diverse, is very different in size, in business models, and so on, and how, although many times it's seen as a source of financing, they also have financial needs to become climate champions. So I'll move on to Victor again, because Victor, you were telling us how these peer learning events contributed to your processes at home. Can you give us, can you elaborate more on how these lessons on the peer learning events were integrated into your work back at home in Peru, in particular with what you already mentioned with communicators in Peru?
Thank you, Mauricio. It's important to recognize so very shortly that Peru is one of the most vulnerable countries to the effects of climate change. We present 7 of the 9 characteristics of vulnerability to climate change recognized by the UNFCCC. In that context, what communications actions we are taking to face climate change in Peru? Saving the lesson learned in the peer learning events, we were capable to integrate into the work back at home. To do this, we asked ourselves 3 questions. The first, are we closing with our people? Not enough. Okay, so second question, who are closer to the people day by day? The media, through journalists and communicators. Okay, so third question, are we supporting them? Bingo. All these questions require a decision. The first Peruvian National Communication Workshop held in Lima, Peru in 2018. The workshop was a milestone in communication for climate change adaptation in the country, bringing together journalists and communicators from subnational levels, 25 different locations across the country, Amazon, Andes, our coast of Peru, in order to strengthen capacities for the effective dissemination of information and awareness of the impacts of climate change. The workshop was organized by MINAM, the Ministry of Environment, with the support of the NAP Global Network US in-country NAP support program, and was a bang on the table. Since that point from now, we have made our communication on climate change not a long list of bad news about its impacts. We explored a series of opportunities to ensure sustainable development, increased competitiveness, and the means to ensure people's well-being. Climate change for us is no longer a horror movie for us. It is a challenge that we are still capable of overcoming, and by doing so, we transform our lives, building stories of progress. 5 years have passed, and since then we have developed 3 more workshops. One exclusively with communicators from indigenous people of our country, strengthening the intercultural approach. And 2 of them are was virtual to the COVID-19 pandemic. And now we already have our national adaptation plan and working on our NDC's implementation, which involve, of course, adaptation measures. So I would like to end my speech thanking once again the organizers and highlighting again that we will not get the urgent climate action needed without civil society pressure, and that can only be obtained with strategic communication, where climate change will become a change with a human face for all. And as Ana Maria and Aida says, I think that the main point is how we can stay together, work together, and commitment together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor, for that. And thank you very much for presenting how these peer learning events you were part of help you to replicate a broader national series of events back home in Peru. And not only that, I would like to take your message on how important communication is to connect it to what Aida mentioned of broadening the number of participants, to diversify the number of participants we collaborate with. And I think it's key to communicate in a way that is relevant to them and getting out of this jargon, this very specific jargon we usually use of NDCs, NAPs, and so on, that no one else understands. And I think we need communicators for that. And linking with Ana Maria's messages, I think this is a common cry of the private sector. Like, they do business and they need to understand the impacts and the opportunities of climate-related challenges for the business models. So I see colleagues nodding. So I'm very glad to have you all here. I would like to thank you again. And I will move to the second segment of this panel. So with a very different flow, I will introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll move on to the questions to broaden the scope to a more global view, if you wish. So first, I would like to introduce Catherine Fisher. She is a peer learning consultant. She's the author of Peer Learning for Climate Action, which was jointly prepared by the IISD, the NAP Global Network, and the ET Support Project for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, GIZ, also known as SPA. And Catherine, thank you very much for being with us today. I can see you on the screen. That's great. And also, I would like to introduce Shinaz Musa, who is the Director of Climate and Development Knowledge Network and Director of South-South North, who is also going to share her experience with us. Thank you very much, Shinaz, for being with us today. Excellent. And finally, for this second segment, I would like to introduce Neera Pradhan, who is a Senior Water and Adaptation Specialist and Program Coordinator at the Kochi Basin Initiative from ICIMUR. And thank you very much for being with us as well, Neera. So we heard from colleagues from the Latin American region. We heard their experience, and I'm pretty sure a lot of what they mentioned resonates with the work you've done and the work that you do, either with the regional or global view. So I would like to start with you, Catherine, and in your broad experience facilitating and writing some inputs about peer learning, what are the main benefits of South-South peer learning in climate-related capacity building activities? Over to you, Catherine.
Great, and thank you, Mauricio. And thank you to all the colleagues who went previously. I feel like you've already made most of the points that I'm about to make, so I'm going to try to be brief. But I want to start by acknowledging that peer learning that we're talking about is nothing new. It's how people have always learned. And I was reminded of this recently when I was doing some work in a peer learning process between Indigenous-led organisations in Canada. And within that, one participant suggested that we should rename peer-to-peer sessions, as it's a colonial term for something Indigenous people have been doing forever. And I think this is a really important thing to remember. So in a world where so-called expert knowledge and top-down models of learning have come to be valued over other sorts of processes, and I think this is something that Professor Khan and his colleagues have talked about a lot, that there's this kind of model that knowledge flows exclusively from north to south and so on. I think South-South learning is a challenge to that, and it's reconnecting to how people have always learned for millennia. And I think we need to sort of think about how that approach and the values that Anna Maria spoke so eloquently about, that each participant is an expert, how we can connect with that to sort of respond to the challenges of our time and our kind of globalized world. So moving on to your question, Monsieur. So in your experience, what are the main benefits of South-South peer learning in climate-related capacity building activities? So I think firstly, I'm going to make 3 points. Firstly, I think peer learning works best when peers are facing similar challenges. And the responding to climate change is creating new peers. And I think that people who are experiencing, so at a global level, although there are huge political, economic, ecological differences between countries in the global south, many are facing similar challenges, whether that's accessing climate finance or creating NAP development processes. So it's people who are new peers, people having to deliver on new challenges, work within new regulations, for which they've not been trained, don't come with a manual. So that's, the climate change is creating new peers. So that's my first point. Secondly, I think peer learning is particularly valuable when there isn't a rule book, when there isn't a manual for how to respond to something. And if we know anything about climate change, the pace of change is outstripping formal processes of knowledge generation and learning, and the strategies responding are emerging and highly contextual. And I think peer learning works really effectively. It's perhaps the only solution to some of these complex, incredibly complex and wicked challenges. So it works in that context because peer learning is about sharing tacit knowledge. So the knowledge that isn't necessarily documented, the kind of knowledge that emerges through conversation. So how something was done, how a challenge was addressed, what worked, and importantly, what didn't work, which is the stuff that we don't often write down and share, and how something changed in response to circumstance. So I think that focus on how things happen is part of this moving from talking to action that people have already talked about and is so important. So finally, I think although peer learning can support sharing of technical knowledge and particularly contextualization of technical knowledge, it goes beyond that. I think it's about inspiration and motivation and agency, and that feeling that you're not alone with the challenge that you've got. And when you're here to speak to participants in peer learning processes, it comes through again and again. that feeling that other people facing the challenge that you have, that some have overcome that challenge. And this impact of greater motivation, it's really difficult to quantify, but it's absolutely priceless. And I think that is a key value of peer learning. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you very much, especially for such a powerful example, working with indigenous communities, and they're telling you, this is what we've done forever. And this is a very powerful way to learn among peers. And I also like that you emphasized how peer learning contexts are important when we face similar challenges. And I think we can agree that we are facing a very broad, difficult challenge, which is climate change, which connects with what Aida was mentioning, of opening and broadening the scope of participants that we bring to these events. So now I would like to move to Shenaz, because you also have a very broad experience with peer learning. And I would like to ask you, in your experience, what is the added value of partnerships across regions to deliver capacity building for climate change? Over to you, Shenaz.
Yeah. Thank you, Mauricio. And I keep getting kicked out of Zoom, but and then I re-enter. So if it happens, I will re-enter. So I just wanted to agree completely with what Catherine said. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that peer-to-peer learning has always been happening, particularly in the global South. And now, I mean, it's just got a name that was given by the North. So, but it's always been there. In terms of partnerships, I think it's also an approach that has always been happening in the majority world. And maybe not global partnerships, but often communities would partner to address a similar challenge. So in our work, particularly, what we're finding is that because the climate crisis is such a complex issue, it's requiring unusual partnerships. So people or organizations that in the past would not be speaking to each other are now having to form partnerships. So if you look at climate resilient development, and particularly infrastructure, your engineers are now needing to speak to your social scientists, to your climate modelers, etc. And so at a local level, those are the sorts of partnerships happening. If we take it to a global level, you now have the situation where financiers are needing to partner with local CSOs and NGOs. So I think there's a big push for your private sector to partner with the public sector and to, in that way, effect and look for the climate solutions, and particularly now where we're in a phase where action is required. So I think there's enough talking about what the issues are, etc., and to implement the climate action on the ground, all sorts of different and unusual partnerships are required. Thank you, for that.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for emphasizing and building on what the previous panelists have been commenting on this, because clearly the challenge of climate change is evolving, is very daunting, and we definitely need a new partnership. And we need to build on the experiences of not only global partnerships, but as you very well mentioned, communities as well have partnered together for centuries to tackle their problem, their challenges, and that's very powerful as well. So now, Nita, I would like to move over to you, because I would like to ask you, in your view, how can ICIMUD's regional approach, which very often also takes a landscape view in the countries where you work, how can this approach facilitate partnerships to advance capacity development? Over to you, Nita.
Thank you for the question, Mauricio. As you correctly mentioned, ICIMUD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, it works in 8 countries in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. starting from Afghanistan in the west to moving towards Myanmar in the east. So we also have the origin of 10 large rivers in this Hindu Kush Himalaya, where almost 1.9 billion people depend on it. And also talking about it, it's the third, it's also known as the third pole because of the ice reserve in this area. So that shows that changes happen in our region before they happen anywhere else. And working together in partnership is very important to deal with these knowledge gaps and building the capacity, learning from each other. Now, referring to what Catherine and Shana said about peer-to-peer learning, and the partnership, it is a horizontal partnership, but I would like to emphasize here, ICIMOD being a regional organization, vertical partnership is also very important. For example, ICIMOD is working with partners at different levels like local, national, regional, and global. So that level of partnership and interaction is also very important. And we are also working with different sectors like government, academia, practitioners, and communities, which others are also working to enhance the capacity and to fill the knowledge gap, the climate knowledge gap in this region. But also talking about it, ICIMOD has a partnership strategy where we work with partners in different ways. Like we have strategic partners with whom we deal at the strategic level. We have knowledge partners, especially when we have to share knowledge, communicate. We have policy partners and we have implementing partners. So these are different types of partners and the partnership modality that we are facilitating as a regional organization. But beyond that, being a regional organization, we also have an advantage of cross-country learnings and sharing of information, knowledge to enhance the capacity. For example, just recently, we took some local government partners from one country to the other country to know about how climate actions are taking place and how it can be replicated in their country. So this is one of the brilliant example of how learnings exchange visits can help each other. But also at the scientific level, we bring scientists from from our Hindu Kush Himalaya region and beyond the region to generate science knowledge and information and scientific products. We also engage with academia through our Himalayan University Consortium, we call it HUC, which has more than 60 members from different academic institutes from Hindu Kush Himalaya region and beyond, especially to look at and to enhance the capacity by conducting joint research and scientific trainings and other things. So this is some kind of very good partnership that we are working with. But we are also engaging with youths. And in coming days, as we move on to our new strategy from 2023, we will be more working with youths and engaging with youths, which is one of the major part of our system. Besides that, I would also like to mention here that we are also working with the UN organization, UNFCCC, and its university partnership program, where we bring partners from different countries to our region to do the research and knowledge. So it's not only from our region going to other countries, but also bringing them here and then making them understand learnings from our region so that they take it to them. So this is how at various levels with various organizations, and vertical as well as horizontal partnership, we are facilitating them to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita, and very interesting points. I just would like to briefly mention again the very important point that you bring to the table of vertical partnerships. How, as we move from planning to implementation, all the international commitments, the national commitments will have to move on to the different levels, up to subnational level, at the local level, and how that would require different partnerships to make that happening in a successful way. So thank you for bringing that different perspective to the conversation. Since we are almost wrapping up this second segment of the panel and also the workshop, I would like to go back to Catherine. And yes, she's still here with us. And Kathleen, I would like to ask you a very specific question. How can donors support peer learning networks and collaboration with academia and the private sector to enhance the capacities of countries across regions in the global south? Over to you.
Okay, I'm going to focus on peer networks because I feel like the others might be more qualified on the other ones to talk about the other ones. So I think the way that peer learning is supported is really important. And so, and I think that, well, I'm going to be building on what points other people have made here. So I think both Aida and Anna Maria and Nira have talked about the importance of processes being demand driven. So the peer learning processes work best when they are owned by the people participating in them. They're driven by them. So that requires, to a certain extent, handing over control. In practice, it means including scoping or inception phases, and investing in those scoping and inception phases. And allowing for iteration and flexibility in the themes that are explored and in the mechanisms used to explore them. So sort of funding mechanisms that require everything to be specified, what topics, what workshops, what dates, does not allow for things to be demand driven and responsive to learner needs. So that's one thing, allow for things to be demand driven and iterative. The second one is peer learning is based on building trust and relationship building. And it sounds obvious. However, it needs to be invested in. That requires time, it requires investment. So things like participating in shared experiences, whether that's field visits, social events, so taking time for connection, taking time for ceremony, all of those things are important in peer learning processes. And I think the other implication for funding is consider investing for the long term. That this is not necessarily short-term processes, but things happen over a long term. And finally, consider the wider context for peer learning and what's needed for peer learning to drive change. Because I think sometimes there's assumption that the barrier to change is somehow individual skills and individual capacities. And often that's only one part of a much more complex picture. So peer learning's much more likely to be effective if it acknowledges that there are barriers and opportunities for change beyond the knowledge and skills of the individuals involved. And supports people to take action, to build on what they've learned. So considering how learners can be supported to implement their learning, providing seed funding for follow-on actions, and considering peer learning is often effective as part of a range of different interventions. So that would be my third suggestion. And finally, for funders, to see yourself as part of the system as well. So, outside the system, you're very much part of the system and can champion peer learning, and the way you fund it will affect how effective it is. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for very specific but very powerful points that you made. And I'm sure that participants are taking a note. In the interest of time, I would like to move back to Shenaz. I hope that she's still with us. I'm not quite sure, Shenaz, if you can hear us. Otherwise, if you are having some technical difficulties, I'll jump to Nira, who is still here with us. So Nira, from the ECMAT's regional approach, would you have some good practices and examples to share on how capacity building through partnerships have been achieved in practice?
Yes, thank you so much for this question, because there are a few things that I would like to share here. The first thing is, like when IPCC AR4 declared that our region is a data gap area, that data gap region. So ICIMO took this challenge, and around 350 scientists and researchers gathered together, and ICIMO facilitated this process to publish the state-of-the-art status report on Hindu-Kush Himalaya region assessment. So this was published in 2019. And this helped a lot of people to understand what is the gap, what is the data gap, and what is the situation in our region. In 2020, the report was presented to the national government through a ministerial summit. And then we took it forward as this government committed to endorse this and take it forward to fulfill this knowledge gap by building the capacity of the different countries and the governments, through HKH call to action. So this is one at the larger level, at the more high level action that we have taken place. I mean, not directly on capacity enhancement, but also looking into like what are the capacity gaps there and how it can be fulfilled. The other example is we also create and facilitate knowledge platforms, like we have Koshi Disaster Risk Reduction Knowledge Platform, or Upper Indus Basin Network, Cryo Hub. These are platforms where we bring in scientists and academicians and all these type of, even the communities, practitioners bring together. And it's more like science-based and discuss on the science, So this is a platform where people share, but also learn from each other. And this is an organic platform, where it's not like a training type of thing to build capacity, but it's more like learning and sharing platform, where we have from different river basins, we have transboundary working groups working together from different basin countries. We also have country chapters working together on it. So in that way, organically, the capacity will be enhanced. One last example, there are many, but one last example looking at the time I would like to give here is a professional training that we provide, training course. Just recently, we completed a 3-week training course where we brought in, around 12 high-level participants from the Hindu-Kush Himalayan countries, which was supported by DFAT. And it was not only in Nepal we did the training, but the participants were taken to Australia. So that was an opportunity where we were able to compare and contrast the situation between the HKH region and the Australian region, and then see how knowledge can be enhanced. So I'd like to stop here without, taking much of the time, though there are many examples that I can give at this moment. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anita, for these very specific examples of the work we do and how this escalated to even cross-regional collaborations. And I think this shows how successful these processes were as well. We are getting close to the end. I'm afraid that Shanaz hasn't been able to reconnect with us. That being the case, I think that I will close this second segment of our panel. I would like to thank again all the organizers and especially all the panelists for sharing all the expertise with us and all the experience. And now, before I close this second segment, I would like to invite Mrs. Deneen Pfeiffer-Soiler, who is a policy analysis for the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate, who will start with some final remarks. Over to you, Nadine.
Thank you very much, Mauricio, and thanks so much also for inviting me to this super interesting event. I've been learning a lot and thinking a lot also on the different points that you've mentioned, and the word partnerships ran throughout this event. But one word I haven't heard yet, which would be for me kind of a natural bridge between the different points that we've touched among, be it partnerships, peer learning, South-South cooperation, South-South-North cooperation, or North-South cooperation, the different ways you might want to frame it, multi-stakeholder partnerships, also including partnerships with the private sector or public-private partnerships. But we haven't really spoken yet much about triangular cooperation. And maybe just as a very brief, no worries, I won't go into definitions, but maybe just to illustrate what it means, or just to give it some life with some example also from the regions that we've been covering here. Triangular cooperation is usually when a country has a certain expertise in an area that it can share as a pivotal partner through the facilitation of one other institution, a country, or an organization with a beneficiary partner for both to benefit or to engage in a kind of a mutual or joint beneficial project. An example here would be for the cooperation or the triangular cooperation between Costa Rica, Tunisia, and Germany, where actually there was no clear beneficiary in that sense, but Costa Rica and Tunisia both had specific experience that they shared, Tunisia with Costa Rica on watershed management, and Costa Rica with Tunisia in another component of this project on sustainable tourism development. And the collaboration was facilitated through Germany, which brought in project management and additional complementary expertise. So in a way, it is a modality for different partners to create, as we've heard earlier, also unusual partnerships. So you wouldn't necessarily think that Costa Rica and Tunisia would cooperate on an everyday basis, but both had specific expertise that the other country needed to tackle an issue that was related, in this case, also to environmental issues or also to fighting climate change. We recently organized in Lisbon the 6th International Meeting on Triangular Cooperation, where we dedicated a specific session to looking at how triangular cooperation can address and contribute to the climate agenda. Because one thing we always find in many of these, or in many meetings, and that's why I'm very happy that the organizers invited me also to join today, is that we often discuss still in silos. So we discuss climate issues in the climate community. We discuss South-South cooperation in the South-South cooperation community. Triangular cooperation, again, has a different community, but we very rarely link the dots. And many things that I've heard today actually would make me think, and also all the learnings that were shared on peer learning and how to set up peer learning processes, all of this actually resonates, and you could probably kind of not copy paste, but adapt it to what are learnings also for triangular cooperation. One point that I heard that's very clear also is investing a lot in creating the partnership in the beginning to build trust. So really investing time to get to know each other, build trust, and then for partnerships to foster and to prosper well later on. Now, during our session in Lisbon on triangular cooperation and the climate agenda, we had some kind of more political statements from Indonesia as holding the current G20 presidency, also on Saudi Arabia on its political ambitions. We were hoping for Egypt also to come in to share some thoughts on COP27, but they had to unfortunately cancel last minute. And then we had a second segment that was really interesting because it was clear, it was kind of a SIDS exchange. We had 3 SIDS who shared, or who all actually agreed that triangular cooperation is a very useful way for them with their very specific vulnerabilities and needs also to share knowledge and to help each other by adapting that knowledge to their context. So we had speakers from the Comoros, from the Dominican Republic, and from Samoa, who were taking also different roles and being a pivotal, sharing knowledge, but also beneficiary in benefiting from this knowledge. And I think we really need to look for more opportunities to link the global agendas and our different communities to speak to each other and to learn how, triangular cooperation is a tool, it's a modality to achieve other goals, how we can really make these also work. And here we have the Global Partnership Initiative on Effective Triangular Cooperation as an established platform that brings together different countries, organizations, CSOs, etc., to exchange and discuss their ideas or their experiences around triangular cooperation. And of course, we would also, my colleague, the focal point of this GPI is here today also, and we would, of course, invite you to join the initiative and to continue also this aspect of the discussions. Thank you very much again, and I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, Mauricio, also for the excellent job in moderating the event. I think we're now moving to the end of the event. I think we have some concluding remarks from our colleague from the UNFCCC, Alejandro Kilpatrick, and we look forward to seeing you all either at COP, if you're joining, or staying engaged in the next year as we develop a new series of seminars. Thank you. And Alejandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juan, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. And thank you to our wonderful panelists. And I think also that the last intervention by Nadine is also very much welcome, and the importance of triangle cooperation. So thank you, everyone. Our event today was the last part of our fruitful workshop series between the OECD and the PCCB network. So therefore, on behalf of the PCCB and the UN Climate Change Secretariat, I would like to thank wholeheartedly the OECD for taking a lead on this series in collaboration with the NAP Global Network, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Columbia Climate School. At the same time, I would also like to highlight that 7 PCCB network member organizations were contributing as resource persons and speakers during this event series. It is great to see how our network brings together important stakeholders from the capacity building community. And we saw it in this last workshop, the importance of networking and collaboration. Through our discussions today, we definitely heard of interesting capacity building experiences and solutions, particularly regarding how to address capacity gaps, to set effective capacity development pathways through different modalities to address these gaps. Nevertheless, capacity building efforts must be continuously pursued, and the PCCB, as a constituted body under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, has the mission to enhance the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate action. In this sense, the PCCB network assists the PCCB in fulfilling this mission, which was a network set up in April of 2020. And through the links provided in the chat by my colleagues, you can sign up and join the PCCB network to be able to connect with peers and partners across sectors and across regions. The network has a membership of a wide range of actors, international organizations, think tanks, NGOs, private sector, youth-led organizations. So there's a lot of opportunity for exchange there. Approaching COP27, I would also like to highlight our ambition for the 4th Capacity Building Hub. Following the link provided by the network team in the chat, you can also look at the themes that focusing on issues directly linked to capacity building to support enhanced climate action that will take place in this 4th Capacity Building Hub and Sharm el-Sheikh. To stay updated with all events and projects, you're also welcome to join us on LinkedIn in our capacity building group, which is also linked or mentioned in the chat. Lastly, I would like to thank our wonderful audience that joined us on for the session. We had a very hefty number of people, very much engaged, and your contribution to this event is very much appreciated, and we would be grateful for your feedback as well. Please use the form you will see. And again, it has been a very fruitful collaboration with the OECD and other partners, and look forward to continue engaging with all of you, and hope to see many of you at COP27 in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, and wish you a nice continuation of your day. Over to you, Juan.
Thank you again from my side, and wishing you also a very good day wherever you are. Bye-bye.